Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, Knee Knits. My name is Amy and here I talk about all things knitting, and today's podcast episode number 49 where I'll be sharing what I've been knitting for the past month. In today's episode, I have a handful of different projects to talk about, including a finished sweater that I have behind me. I'll be talking about my Karl Johan sweater, as well as a finished pair of socks. And I have a few projects on the needles. Some are old that you've seen before, and some are new. So I'm really excited to share what I've been working on for the past few weeks. It's definitely been a while since I last filmed a project update episode or a formal podcast. I took a break after or around the holidays, and it kind of became an extended break into January. So it's actually been a full, I think almost 5 weeks since I last shared all my projects with you all. So I'm really excited and eager to get back into the normal sit down podcast. So let's get into my first finished object, my Karl Johan sweater. I'm really excited to talk about this sweater. I have been loving this. I feel like this was just a surprise hit of 2024. I started knitting it in November and finished it up right after Christmas time, and I've been wearing it nonstop ever since. This pattern, the Karl Johan sweater, is by Pernille Larsen, who is the Knitting for Olive pattern designer. I use the pattern that I have in the Knitting for Olive book, but the pattern is also available separately. This is a DK weight top-down sweater. The suggested yarns are the classic combo of Knitting for Olive Merino held with Knitting for Olive soft silk mohair. I held Sorella Yarn's Cashmere sock in the color Evie, which is the fingering weight yarn held with Knitting for Olive soft silk mohair in the color Petroleum Green. This is the yarn combo here. I thought they were the perfect pairing. The Cashmere sock was gifted to me, and Evie was from Sorella's library collection, and this is a blend of 80% superwash merino, 10% nylon, and 10% cashmere. It is a 4-ply fingering weight sock yarn. There's 435 yards in this 100 gram skein. It is super soft and buttery, and I am a big fan of the cashmere sock base. It's a really smooth fingering weight yarn. And the Knitting for Olive soft silk mohair, many people are familiar with. This color Petroleum Green is a really nice teal blue green color, and together I just thought they went really well. So I knit my sweater with 4.5mm needles, which was the suggested needle size for the body of the sweater. I was kind of surprised myself that I was able to meet gauge with the suggested needle size, because I tend to be a tight knitter and tend to have to size up my needle size from the suggestion in the pattern. So maybe Pernille Larsen and I have very similar tight knitting gauges, but this is a 20 stitch per 4 inch gauge, which makes just a really comfortable fabric to wear. DK weight sweaters are my go-to just because it's a great weight, I think, to have that sort of professional clean look with smaller stitches, but the fabric is not too heavy to wear at the same time, and it's also not tedious to knit. Like, I feel like it still can go by quickly at a DK weight gauge. I did, however, use a different needle size for the ribbing accents. I actually sized up my needle kind of by accident. I cast on, because you do cast on with the turtleneck here, with 4mm needles, and didn't realize until I was like partway through it that the pattern actually said US 4 needles, which would be a 3.5mm. But I'm actually really happy that I sized up for the turtleneck, because I didn't really want the turtleneck to be very tight or restricting around my neck. So I think sizing up to 4mm worked out pretty well, and I really like the way that the collar looks. I did do the same for the ribbing on the sleeves and the body. This is all 4mm needles. The Karl Johan sweater has a contiguous saddle shoulder construction. So like I said before, you do start in the round with the turtleneck, so everything is in the round. You never have to knit flat and pick up any stitches, except for when you do some short row shaping to do the front neckline. The saddle shoulder shaping creates a really beautiful shape. You can see this panel that goes across the top of the shoulder, and then it drops down with increases that create that vertical line for the sleeve cap, which looks really beautiful. It does have a little bit of a taper at the end to extend the body length, and you can see that the sleeve yoke goes pretty deep. I would not call this a dolman sweater in any means, but I think it does have some similarities to dolman sweaters where you have this very wide and deep armhole depth. But in general, it looks really clean. It gives it a very streamlined look because you have the vertical lines of the sleeve cap. It just looks very streamlined, which I really like. So I knit this sweater mostly to pattern. The one thing I did modify significantly were the sleeves. So in the pattern, it has you do a bishop sleeve, which means you have no sleeve decreases at all until you do a rapid decrease right before the ribbing of the sleeve to give it sort of that puffed out look. It gives the sweater more of like a blousey style style, which I didn't really want. I knew I wanted a streamlined tapered sleeve to sort of complement the streamlined look of the set-in shoulder construction. So to calculate how I wanted to do the tapered sleeve, I took the stitch count of the sleeve when you first pick up at the underarm, so the initial stitch count, and then I took the stitch count of the sleeve cuff from the pattern and I subtracted those to figure out how many stitches total needed to be decreased. And then I decided how long I wanted to knit the stockinette portion of my sleeve. I knew I wanted it to be 10 inches. That's kind of like a measurement that I have figured out based off of my other sweaters and sleeve lengths that I like, and I used my row gauge with the 10 inches to figure out how many rows of knitting of stockinette that was for the sleeve total. So then I evenly distributed that amount of stitches I was having to decrease throughout that number of rounds or rows. And I did the classic 2 stitches decreased per round. So that gave me this perfectly tapered sleeve that was the perfect length when I needed to start the ribbing, which helped out a lot. It's also something you can do if you tend to knit your sleeves a lot shorter than what patterns recommend, or if you need to knit your sleeves a lot longer, you can help distribute those decreases a bit more evenly if you find your sleeves are a little bit wonky, having to either shrink or lengthen the sleeves. So I'm really happy with how that modification turned out. I am really pleased with the tapered sleeve. I feel like it's just exactly what I wanted in this finished object. So besides the sleeves, the sweater is pretty much knit to pattern. I did knit the suggested size for myself, which was the second size in the pattern. I wear this with 4 inches of positive ease, which to me is just the sweet spot for the best amount of ease if I want a sweater that can be styled many different ways. I find that more than like 6 inches of positive ease is more of like a slouchy casual look. Anything less than 4 inches is more of like a tight fitting, maybe more formal or like summer tops kind of look. But this 4-inch amount of positive ease on this sweater was exactly what I wanted. And I think the suggested amount of positive ease in this pattern is 0 to 4 inches. The sweater is really comfortable to wear. I love the yarn combo. The soft silk mohair and the cashmere sock base are just really nice feeling. It just feels lightweight but still very warm, of course. I love the turtleneck. It's not suffocating around my neck at all, but it definitely provides warmth, and it's not scratchy at all. I don't have any issues wearing this sweater, which is why I've been wearing it pretty much nonstop since I finished knitting it. I was very surprised with the amount of yarn that I needed for this sweater, meaning I used a lot less yarn than I expected to. I knit this entirely with 2 skeins of the Sorella yarn and then less than 4 skeins of the soft silk mohair. So I was kind of glad that I didn't have to break into the 3rd skein of the fingering weight yarn. Kind of surprised because normally when I do these kinds of combos, fingering weight with mohair, I tend to break into the 3rd skein. So maybe because this isn't a super oversized sweater and I opted for the thinner tapered sleeves, that helped me with some yarn usage. I really enjoyed knitting this pattern. I really like the way it looks. It's definitely one of my new favorite knits. I think it just fits really well. It was really kind of mindless to knit because it's one of those stockinette projects, but I really love how this construction really keeps you engaged throughout the whole yoke. And because the yoke was so deep, like by the time you were done and just knitting stockinette for the body, like there wasn't much to do for the body length. So the sweater felt like it went by really quickly. I also love, like I said before, it's all knit in the round and you just knit continuously from the turtleneck down. So there's very few ends to weave in, minimal picking up stitches. So it was my ideal knit project. And I did plan on wearing this sweater for today's podcast, and I'll go pop it on right now. So this is my Karl Johan sweater. I'm a big fan of it. I love the color. This teal green color is definitely one of my favorites. Just a couple notes on the fit. I do notice that it does have this little bubbling that happens around the bottom of the neckline. I really don't mind it. I feel like because it's kind of like an even amount of bunching and it like follows the shaping of the sweater, like it looks natural to me, but I do know that some people who have knit this before aren't a fan of this that happens, and I think this is happening because of subpar short row shaping. Like there might need to be more shaping in this sweater to help it kind of like lay more like this. So that's something to note about the pattern. If you're interested in knitting it and don't want this to happen, you might have to make some mods, or you might want to skip over this pattern because it does do this pretty naturally on me without not much I can do about it to fix it right now. Moving on to my next finished object now, I knit a pair of penny gloves, and these have not been on a podcast episode yet, but if you watched my Everything I Knit in 2024 video, you will have noticed that these are one of my most recent finished projects at the end of 2024. Really happy to have finally knit myself a pair of penny gloves. The pattern's by Petite Knit, and this pattern was gifted to me by a viewer, so thank you so much for that. Really exciting that I got to use a gifted pattern. And there's not much to the penny gloves. If you're unfamiliar with the pattern, they are a stockinette fingerless glove. They're knit from the bottom here in the round, and then you work your way up to the thumb, do some increases, split for the thumb and the hand, and then you cast off. The yarn that I used for mine is Filcolana Alva. This is a lace weight 100% alpaca yarn. This is in the color Bordeaux, and I held this double on 3mm needles. It is one of the suggested yarns for the pattern, and it is suggested to be held double, and I really like the way that the yarn feels. I know I've mentioned alpaca can be itchy for me depending on the type of alpaca or the type of yarn. I haven't really had any issues with this. I do like the texture of it. You can see it's very fuzzy, like this kind of has a felted look even though it's not felted at all. It just has a lot of extra fibers sticking out from it and just gives it a little bit more texture than like a smooth merino yarn. In terms of fit for these penny gloves, I really just wanted to knit these up without much thought, so I didn't bother doing a gauge swatch at all. I just cast on with the suggested needle size, which was 3mm needles, and my gauge was a little bit tighter than Petite Knit's gauge, which was okay for me because my hands are pretty small compared to the average hands, so I did kind of want my penny gloves to be smaller than intended to help fit my hands a little bit better, and it worked out pretty well for a completely non-mathematical sizing adjustment with my gauge. They fit pretty well. I think these have like a 6-inch circumference around the hand, and they're really comfortable. They're definitely form-fitting. They don't feel too loose, and they don't really move around too much on my hand, which is nice. Now, Filcolana Alva comes in 25-gram balls, so I had 2 of these balls, and I ended up using 30 grams of yarn to knit this pair, which to me was super inconvenient because now I have a 20-gram amount of Filcolana Alva that I'm not really sure what to do with, and it's not enough to make another pair of penny gloves unless I do them very short, which is totally a possibility, but I just thought it was a little inconvenient with the amount of yarn usage. Had I had known, which I could have known because it does say in the pattern that you'll use 35 grams of yarn, so pretty close. Had I had known, I probably would have gotten 3 balls of Alva total, so that way I could make a second pair and use up more of the yarn. Who knows? I don't know. But I'm sure I'll find a use for the Filcolana Alva. Maybe I'll hold it with something to make like a headband, or like I said before, making shorter penny gloves. But I was really pleased with this pattern. It was super quick. I knit these in less than a week, and it was really satisfying. I didn't really have any like second sock syndrome where I didn't want to cast on the second one, and I've been wearing these a lot. They're definitely really practical in the winter for me. I know some people are like, why would you want fingerless gloves? Because your fingers are so cold, but I like them because I can put them on and it keeps most of my hands warmer than if I wasn't wearing anything at all, and I don't have to take them on and off as I do things. Like if I'm out running errands, I'll just put these on with my coat and I can run all my errands and leave these on the entire time. Can't do the same if I had mittens on. I would have to take them off if I'm going to the store or if I need to type on my phone. So these I find are much more usable, even though of course they don't keep your entire hands warm. This is enough coverage, I think, to make a difference on the frigid winter days. So those are my penny gloves. I definitely plan on making more. Would love to make them as gifts. I feel like these are very giftable. They knit up faster than socks. They knit up faster than like a beanie, depending on what kind of beanie you're making. So I'm a big fan. I can't believe it took me this long to knit them, but I'm really glad that I did. And my last finished object for today are a pair of socks. These are the Euterpe Socks from Sari Nordland's book, Softly. So I do have Sari Nordland's book. There are a bunch of different patterns in here that are really fun, classic Sari Nordland patterns, lots of lace, texture, cables. So the Euterpe Socks are a toe-up, all over cabled with twisted stitches sock pattern. And I had originally cast these on as part of Young Folk Knit's Softly knit along. I kind of lost track of the knit along, have no idea if it's still going on or not. I haven't even posted these on Instagram yet, but I did finish them. They did take me a good chunk of time compared to normal stockinette vanilla socks, but I'm really happy with how they turned out. So let me show you the front of the sock. This is the main pattern. You can see all of those twisted stitches that sort of zigzag back and forth really stunning, really fun to knit. I really enjoyed it, even though it is like twisted stitches. I didn't really have any difficulty with knitting them. I did knit these socks using 2.5mm needles, which was the suggested needle size in the pattern, and I used the magic loop method, so I have the very long needle tips, which give me a lot of good leverage with doing all of those cables without a cable needle. And these socks do have a different pattern on the back leg. Also twisted stitches that are cabled, but a little bit different of a pattern, and I think complements the front of the sock really well. So here's a little side-by-side of both patterns on each side of the foot. Really beautiful. This is definitely the most intricate pair of socks that I've made so far, and I definitely have an interest to knit more. It was just really satisfying, and I just love looking at these socks, and I really can't wait to wear them. The yarn that I used is Momonoki Yarns Sock Fine 4-ply in the color Fir Tree. It's this really beautiful tonal, kind of like an evergreen color that has enough variegation to keep the sock interesting, but not too much where it didn't take away from the texture pattern of the sock. This was my first heel flap and gusset sock that is knit toe up, and I really enjoyed the process. I really liked how the construction of the heel flap and gusset were made toe up. I feel like I might even say that I prefer them over cuff down heel flap and gusset socks. I think the fit of these is really good. I was able to knit them where they fit pretty well. I knit the first size in the pattern. I did have to restart when I first cast these on. I had gone for the second size, which based off of like the stitch count was more familiar to me with my other socks. So again, I didn't gauge swatch for these socks. I wasn't going to gauge swatch in this stitch pattern. So I cast on the second size because the stitch count looked like it would fit my foot well, but it ended up being way too big when I got maybe like an inch into the toe. So I ripped that out and then cast on with the first size, and it worked out quite well. The sock was entirely charted in the book, and I did the first sock needing to be completely dependent on the chart, but by the time that I had started the second sock, I was able to memorize the zigzag pattern and was able to do this like without the chart and without the book, which was very helpful. I do love knitting books. I have I would say sizable collection of knitting books, and I just really like looking at them, but I find them a little bit impractical in the sense that when you're on the go with a knitting project, it's hard to bring your book with you, so I had to take pictures of the whole pattern, so they were on my phone. Part of me wishes that when you bought a knitting pattern book, you also got like a digital copy of it, so that way you could keep the pattern like on your laptop or on your phone. Obviously, I understand you can't always do that, but in a perfect world, that would be a little bit more practical for me than needing to take pictures of the charts in here so I can knit these socks on the go. Really happy with these socks. I definitely want to do more textured socks with more tonal yarns this year. I feel like the majority of the socks that I have knit are stockinette, and they are meant to show off the fun yarns that I have collected, but I think it's really cool to show off really fun stitch patterns with a more tonal, less variegated yarn. So I'm going to try to cast on another Sorry Nordland sock pattern from the book soon. Not sure when, not sure what yarn, but it's definitely in my mind to do as a future project. Going into my works in progress. So it's funny, all of my works in progress are new to the podcast except for this first one, but I feel like this one is pretty new because I barely worked on it the last time I showed this in the podcast, and that is the Vivienne Pullover by Sorry Nordland. The Vivienne Pullover is a top-down drop shoulder cabled sweater, and it's knit in a sport weight yarn, and this is my progress on mine so far. Now, I'm not sure how clear the stitch patterning is coming up when I hold it back here, but I'm going to try to hold it close so you can see the Vivienne pattern. It features a big swatch of honeycomb cable that goes down the front center, and there are these other cables that go down the side. I forget the names of these ones, and then a couple other smaller cables, and it's surrounded by single moss stitch. A pattern that looks pretty intimidating, but definitely compared to the Aurelia pullover, this is a lot simpler, where the cable repeats are much less frequent. This was really easy to memorize. I'm already working without needing to look at the chart on this sweater and having a lot of fun with it. I am using the suggested yarn for this pattern, which is Durarum Natura Ulyss. This is a woolen spun sport weight wool yarn, and I'm using the color Merlot, which is this stunning deep red color. It has definitely a bit of heathering. There's like some pops of bright red and also some pops of black. It is a dark color, but I really love how it's looking with all the cables. I know dark colors aren't people's first choices for cables, but I think this is gonna look stunning in person. It's definitely like easy to see and really fun to work on. However, not really fun to work on in the dark. I've been working on this sometimes at night and it's impossible to see the stitches, so I might have to get like a little lamp so I can knit in the dark while watching TV. We'll see. This drop shoulder sweater pattern does have the standard drop shoulder construction where you knit the back panel first and you knit it flat. So I cast on at this point here and you do increases, and now I'm just at the point where I'm trying to get this to a specific length before I pick up for the tops of the shoulders along this angled part. I've been doing this without a cable needle as well. I think my cable needle days are behind me, which is really exciting to share. It's definitely really enjoyable to knit on, except for the honeycomb. I think the honeycomb is not that fun. It's basically 1/1 cables that do this the whole time. So, I mean, every other stitch you gotta move, and I have messed up a few times with the honeycomb and not realized until several rows later. So I did twice have to tink back and sort of re-knit the honeycomb to be going the right way. So I'm now an expert at fixing honeycomb stitch, but I hope I don't have to do it again in the future. I'm trying to be really diligent in reading my knitting and making sure I'm doing the cables in the right direction with every single row. I'm actually finding myself reaching for this project more than I would expect. It is my most involved project at the current time, but I'm just having a really good time knitting it. I forgot to mention I am using 4mm needles to knit this project. I am doing the second size in the pattern, which is the recommended size for myself, and I can't wait to see how it turns out. All right, now moving on to two projects you have not seen yet. The first is a classic, and I'm honestly surprised I haven't knit it yet, but it is the Sophie Shawl. I've been really eager to knit a Sophie Shawl ever since everyone's been posting like different reels and posts about how to style it different ways. I love the look of the Sophie Shawl like tied up in a knot around people's necks. I love the look of it worn as like a hood. However, I knew I wanted the Sophie Shawl and not the Sophie hood just because I wanted more versatility with it, and I feel like the Sophie hood is kind of like you have to wear it as a hood. So maybe I'll make the Sophie hood in the future, but really wanted just a classic petite knit Sophie Shawl. Not really going to talk about how it's constructed because everyone knows how it's constructed. I am using a new to me yarn. This is Holskarn Cielo. Actually, let me grab the ball. So we are still obsessed with the fluffy, big, chunky yarns. I don't think that obsession will go away. So this Holskarn Cielo is 42% alpaca, 42% merino, and 16% polyamide. But it's not a blown yarn. It's not like the Originally Lovely Fluff that I've used, or the Sorella Yarn Surrey DK, or Knit Picks Wonder Fluff. Those are all, they have polyamide cores that are blown fibers into them to give it kind of like a clear, rounded shape. This is like a knit I-cord with all of those fibers. If you can see the strand here, and you might be able to see the I-cord structure. So it doesn't really have a rounded shape. It's got a little bit of an irregular shape with the yarn strand. It's also super stretchy because it is like a knit I-cord or a crochet chain similar to that, but I've really enjoyed using this yarn. This was sent to me to try, and then I was able to ask for a project quantity for the Sophie Shawl from Holskarn. So that was really fun. I had sampled this and I was like, oh, this is going to be perfect for a Sophie Shawl because it's really airy, it's really squishy. Of course, it's extremely soft, and I just knew it was going to make kind of like the perfect texture for something I want to wrap myself in this winter. This is the color Granny, which has some variegation, which I also really like. Just like a pale gray color with a little bit of pops of like charcoal and pops of white as well. And I'm knitting my Sophie Shawl on 5.5mm needles, and I really like the fabric that it is creating. I think this is an Aran weight yarn. It's a 50-gram ball and there's 125 meters in here, so I got 5 balls for the Sophie Shawl. I'm trying to get size large, but I'm just really knitting until I use up half my yarn and then going into the decreases. So I think I'm almost at the midpoint. I just finished the second ball, so I need to knit with half a ball before I start decreasing. So this might give you a good concept of the size that my Sophie Shawl will be. It's pretty big. I wanted it to be pretty wide so that way I could really wrap myself up in it. And I also wanted to be able to wrap it twice and like tie the knot at the front. I think that's just a really cute look. So I've been enjoying knitting this. I do talk about how like the Sophie scarf is not, and the Sophie Shawl, it's like the same pattern. Not the most mindless knit because you have to keep track of your row count, and it's really hard to quickly see what row you're on because of the I-cord edges and because of the garter stitch. So I really only knit on this when I'm sitting on the couch and I know I can knit like the specific amount of rows in one repeat at a time. So I like never put this down without finishing an entire row repeat, so that way I know I'm always on row 1 next time I pick it up. In that sense, I don't really bring this project on the go with me, but it's been knitting up really fast and I'm really enjoying knitting with the yarn. It's just so like squishy and scrumptious. So this has been a fun project for me and I think I'm gonna finish it up pretty quickly. My last work in progress of today's episode is also a new cast on, and I'm really happy to have finally casted on the Traveler Hoodie by Andrea Mowry. I've been talking about knitting this pattern for a very long time. It's been in many different of my planning videos, like many different seasons, and I finally got the yarn for it that I'm really excited to use, and I finally cast on over the holiday break. The Traveler Hoodie is a drop shoulder, knit from the bottom up hoodie, which I've never knit a sweatshirt with a hood before. It's oversized and cropped and features this texture pattern of alternating knit and purls, kind of looks like garter stitch ribbing, if that makes sense. I don't know if I said that right. It also has options for a non-hoodie if you just want the crew neck, but I'm really excited to be knitting the hoodie version. And this is my progress so far. Now this is knit bottom up, and it's not my very first bottom up sweater, but it is my first bottom up Andrea Mowry drop shoulder pattern. So I know that she does kind of a unique approach to bottom up drop shoulders, where I think there's some increases at the underarm and 3 needle bind offs at the top of the shoulders. I am really excited to see how it all comes together, and also really curious to see how the hood is knit because I've never done anything like that before. This is a sport weight pattern, and the yarn that I'm using is a Knit Picks yarn called High Desert, which I have spoken about this briefly before. I knit my gray Manhattan hat out of High Desert worsted. This is High Desert sport weight. So Knit Picks has this 100% American grown and spun yarn. It is a blend of merino and merino rambouillet. It's a non-superwash. It comes in a really beautiful palette of colors, kind of like earthy colors, some pops of color, and also has all the neutrals that you would want. So this color here is called Ponderosa Heather, which is an olive green color. I'm really excited to be knitting with this olive color. It's just something that I haven't really knit with before, and I wanted something that was a color for the hoodie, but I didn't want it to be like too much of a pop of color. Like I still want it to be kind of neutral, and I feel like this olive kind of military green is the perfect like balance of color and neutral. So the skein of yarn is 100 grams and there's 298 yards in the skein. The Ponderosa Heather has some really nice heathering. I really like this yarn because of its twist. It's really plump and has a tight twist, so it has a bit of bounciness when you're knitting with it, and I think it shows off this stitch pattern really well. So this is what I've knit so far close up. So I did start with a tubular cast on as written in the pattern, and then went into 2x2 ribbing, and then I went into the stitch pattern here. Pretty easy to memorize when it's in the round. I do know when it splits to be knitting flat, it seems like a bit more of like a alternating knits and purls that I'm sure I'll memorize, but it looks a little bit more complex than this in the round here. There are slip stitches at either side, which creates this really fun little knit column that goes up the sides, and I think this might help with stretching because this is a very stretchy stitch pattern, and I think it might have potential to stretch out too much, so the slip stitches I think help with that. If not, they definitely look really nice on either side of the body. This hoodie is going to have about 10 inches of positive ease on me. I am knitting the second size, which was the recommended size for my measurements. I feel like there's not too much to say since this is all I have knit so far. I did just get to the point where I'm ready to split for like the armholes, which is kind of hard to believe because this doesn't look like it has any length on it at all. But I do know that I want it cropped. I do really like how Andrea Mowry wears it with like the athletic leggings, and it kind of hits right at like the smallest point of her waist, which is what I'm aiming for with mine. And I am using my Andrea Mowry's DRK Everyday Sweater as sort of like a measurement baseline. That to me is like the perfect cropped length for a sweater on me, where it's long enough where it doesn't really like move up and show skin if I lift my arms, but it's still obviously like a cropped fit. So I measured that measurement from the top of the shoulder to the end of the sweater, and that was 18 inches. And size 2 in the schematic for the traveler hoodie is 18.5 inches from the top of the shoulder to like the end of the sweater. So I'm basically following the pattern as written to hopefully get that cropped fit on me. I think it's interesting because I tend to crop things more than what patterns suggest because I am really short. So I think that's something to note. If you're not really short and don't really want a really cropped traveler, you probably will have to add length from what Andrew Bowery writes in the pattern. So this here is apparently long enough to split for sleeves, and it is going to grow when it blocks. I think it'll be a good length, and I'm pretty confident with sweater surgery, so if I do need to go back and add more length later, I think that won't be too difficult to kind of like cut into this first knit section here and either add a little garter ridge or remove something. So I hope I don't have to do that, but I think I feel confident enough where I'm just gonna follow the pattern, see how it blocks, and then yeah, that's probably the worst part about bottom-up sweaters is you can't try them on as you go. So it's kind of a guessing game of what's the right length. I will keep you posted on knitting up my traveler hoodie. And if you're interested in the Knit Picks High Desert yarn, now is a great time to shop. They actually have a lot of the colors, including this one, on sale right now. And it just recently got RWS certified. I just saw this in the Knit Picks catalog here. So fun fact, they're actually phasing out the old labels so that way they can add on the RWS certification to the new labels, and because of that they have a bunch of colors discounted so they can sell off those ones with the old labels. So it's always the same yarn, but now on sale. I do have an affiliate link in the description of this video if you're interested in shopping and supporting my channel as well. And lastly, moving into some acquisitions. So I actually have a good handful of acquisitions to share. I mean, it's been like 5 weeks since I last filmed. Also, Christmas happened, so I got some knitting related gifts. So really excited to share not just yarn, I have some fun things, including this book. So yes, this is my first acquisition, and this is the Knitter's Book of Yarn by Clara Parks. I'm really excited to have this book. This was on my Christmas wish list, and my husband graciously gifted it to me, and I first heard about this book from Andrea Mowry. She has suggested this, and this is all about yarn in the context of knitting. So if you're really into like the technical breakdowns of every single different type of fiber and how yarns are spun and the different attributes of different yarns, including like fiber types, how they apply to knitting, and like spinning types and how they apply to knitting, this is like has everything you need to know. So I've really been enjoying reading this. I haven't finished reading through it, but already have gotten such like a wealth of knowledge about different fibers, and I'm hoping to be able to apply the knowledge as I knit more projects, of course, and need to select yarns. I think this is going to help me make good educated selections for yarn projects, so that way I know that I have selected the best yarn for the best use. This book does look pretty beefy, but it does contain 40 patterns, which are the majority of like this back chunk. So most of the technical info is just in this first chunk here. I actually kind of have no interest in the patterns in this book. I think this book was published a bit ago, so the style of the patterns in here is not really anything I have an interest in knitting in, but I do know that the patterns are kind of like case studies for the different types of yarns that they're discussing in here. So it will be interesting to look at, but I probably won't knit any patterns from this book. Staying on the concept of knitting accessories and notions, I got this really cool gift from my friend who's also a knitter, and these are Addi's Flexi Flips. So Flexi Flips are kind of a hybrid between double pointed needles and like circular needles. So in the set, it came with 3 of these needles, and I know a lot of people will use these for socks and small circumference knitting. My friend got me them in the 2.25 millimeter size, which is perfect because that's what I use for most of my fingering weight socks. And this is something that I've always wanted to try, but I never thought about buying the set myself. So this was kind of like the perfect gift because now I can try them and let you know what I think. So I believe the concept is that you knit with 2 of them and you use the 3rd needle as kind of like your traveling needle. So it really does have a hybrid between knitting on magic loop where you have the flexible cord, but The knitting motion, I think, is more similar to DPN's, and I think the bend in the needles helps with preventing like laddering or gaps that you might have from rigid double-pointed needles. So I haven't tried them yet at all. I'm really curious to see how they go for me. I'm a magic loop knitter, so I don't know if I'll love them or not, but this will just be a fun thing to try. If you've used Flexi Flips, I'm really intrigued, so let me know in the comments like how you use them and if you love them, or maybe you've used them and didn't really love them. I'm just curious to see like the best demographic that they fit to. Like, I don't know if they'll be good for me because I do magic loop, but maybe if you use DPNs, they'll be perfect. So we'll see. I'll keep you guys posted. I do plan on using these for my next vanilla pair of socks, whatever that might be. I also got these prism glasses that help me see what's in my lap and in my hands without straining my neck, so that's pretty cool. I know I look ridiculous right now trying these on, but this is just kind of like, my friend gave them to me as like a gag gift, but I feel like these are going to be really practical because why not save my neck while knitting or reading books? And they work like surprisingly well. Like, it's amazing the clarity and how much I can see like literally on my lap without needing to move my neck at all. So this is really fun. I don't really know where she got these, probably from Amazon, but I feel like I couldn't not share them on the podcast. And of course I have some new yarn to share. The first is a really fun find. So I got my first ever 100% cashmere yarn from my local yarn store. They had this cashmere Lusso or cashmere Lusso by Fibra Natura on sale. They had these huge sale bins and this was in there and I was like, oh my goodness. So I was able to get this cashmere on a discount. This is a 50% virgin cashmere and 50% recycled cashmere. It is a 50-gram ball, so I got 2 of them so I could get 100 grams, and there are 225 meters in each ball. So I think that's a sport weight yarn. It doesn't look like this has a color name, but it's just a charcoal color. It's got a bit of heathering, so basically black, but with a little bit of depth to it. And I was thinking of knitting a brioche scarf, a brioche neck scarf with this. Florence Miller has recommended this brioche scarf pattern, and I really want to try it. And I think it'll be the perfect use for this cashmere, for this quantity of cashmere, and I'm just really excited to get knitting with it and feel extra luxurious. And yeah, I just thought it was a good find. It was on sale and I could not take it home with me, so really excited to add this to my yarn collection and hopefully knit it up soon. And I have one more skein of new yarn, and this is this really fun multicolored yarn from Sorella. This was their vintage flannel color that they had as like a limited edition pre-order right at the end of their autumn tonal season. So this is kind of like a this is late for me to share with you, but I got this a while ago. And this is the nylon sock base, and I'm just really excited to knit up some vanilla socks with this. This is gonna make some micro stripes on the sock, I'm like 99% sure, and there's just so many different fun colors like green, blue, brown, red. Like, it's just an explosion of color. I would never use this yarn for anything else besides a sock, just because it doesn't really fit into like my color aesthetic, but I just love knitting fun socks with fun yarn, and I think this is gonna be exactly that. So maybe something that I'll knit with the Flexi Flips. If you're unfamiliar with the nylon sock base from Sorella, it's a 2-ply sock yarn, 80% superwash merino, 20% nylon. This is a 400 yard skein in 100 grams. So it's got that sort of plump feel, and I'm really excited to use it. And that's everything to share from my normal podcast. I forgot to mention at the beginning of the video, probably a different setup than what you're used to. Just rearranged the craft room a bit. It's kind of in the middle of being rearranged. I have some ideas for improving it in the future, need to put some stuff on the walls, and I hope to set up like a nice desk space for me to have like available for crafting and other stuff. I did also get some new filming lights, which is a really nice improvement for my filming schedule. Being dependent on the sunlight was really difficult in the wintertime, and as someone who works full-time, I can only film on the weekends, and when I can only film in the daylight, that would give me like a very limited time on like Saturday morning to film, and if I missed that window, it was really difficult to be able to film a video. So the lights give me a lot of flexibility to film at any time during the week, like evenings and after the sun has gone down. Like at this point in time, the sun has gone down. So really excited that I'm able to film at any time now. Still definitely working out like the best arrangement for the lights, the best settings. I could tell while filming today there were some shadows on my face, so I will continue to improve that, and I hope you enjoy the new setup. I also reorganize the yarn shelf a bit. So yeah, that's what's going on with me. I hope you guys are having a great start to your 2025, and I'm looking forward to filming more videos and sharing my project updates with you all. Feel free to subscribe if you like what you saw today and want to keep track of my projects. If you want to follow me on Instagram, my Instagram is at @ne_knits, where I post similar project updates and photos, and my Ravelry and shopping links for stuff that I talked about today are all linked in the description box of the video. Thank you for joining. I'll see you next time. Bye.